Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today I want to actually go over this theory that is circulating on the internet.com that essentially the president of Venezuela, Nicholas Maduro, has emptied out the prisons of Venezuela in order to send the hardcore criminals to the United States of America, disguised amongst the other asylum fraudsters, and that is why we should expect higher levels of violent crime in the United States of America, and that also explains the decrease in violent crime in the nation of Venezuela. Now, we're going to break this down. We're going to talk about the plausibility of this theory, whether or not there is supporting evidence for it, and whether or not there is an alternative explanation that makes sense for why we're seeing the emergence of said Venezuelan gangs in the United States of America. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. So the migrant crisis in the United States of America is all but undeniable, unless, of course, you are a left-wing progressive politician like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who says that this is totally a hoax, it's made up, and you're just evil white racists for thinking that this is actually happening.
And we can call it caravans, we can call it migrant crises, we can call it family separation, and they will just recycle it over and over and over again in order to gin up, just so much animosity and destruction in this country and racism in this country, because that's the only thing that the Republican Party even is standing on at this point.
Now, of course, Ocasio-Cortez is ridiculous and absurd, but I just want to point out that not only is the migrant crisis real, not only is it a dramatic problem in the United States of America, but it is a problem that Joe Biden explicitly asked for.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are.
But that being said, there is a bit of a new wrinkle in this whole migrant crisis, and that is the idea that the nation of Venezuela is taking advantage of our weak southern border and sending criminals from Venezuelan street and or prison gangs to the United States of America as a method to destabilize the United States of America. And surprisingly, when looking into this theory, I actually discovered that it's a bit older than people might think it is. In fact, there was a letter sent to Secretary Mayorkas back in 2022 asking him to look into the possibility that the Venezuelan government, which by the way may or may not have been working with the Chinese in an effort to destabilize the United States of America, was in fact doing just this, sending their prisoners, letting them out of those prisons to come to the United States of America in order to wreak havoc. And by the way, there are particular gang members that have shown up in recent prominent criminal cases that were not usually seen in the United States of America and were mostly in the prisons of Venezuela.
The fastest growing transnational criminal organization known as the Tren de Aragua is a Venezuelan gang that has now infiltrated its way into the United States through various sectors of the U.S.-Mexico border.
Now, to be clear, it is an undisputed fact that this criminal organization is in the United States of America, and by the way, is one of the fastest growing criminal organizations in Latin America at this moment in time. But keep that name in your mind,
Tren de Aragua,
because that organization has been popping up a lot in recent prominent headlines, and you guys might not remember this or you might not have heard this particular detail, but that infamous attack in Times Square on NYPD officers was actually perpetrated by this same criminal organization. These two people are confirmed members of that particular gang, so without any doubt, they are here in the United States of America. But of course, the question is, related to this particular theory, is whether or not the Venezuelan government itself has decided to send these people directly to the United States in order to create chaos in this particular country.
That here in El Paso, Tren de Aragua, gang members who are identified are put into prosecution pathways for 1325 illegal entry into the United States.
According to a CNN report from Border Patrol, 38 suspected members from the Tren de Aragua have been arrested between 2022 and 2023.
Now, I just want to point out really quickly that the budget on this local news affiliate is exceedingly low, embarrassingly such. But as I just said, they have about 38 confirmed arrests between 2022 and 2023, which, if we're being perfectly honest, is just not that many people. However, particularly in El Paso, when they suspect these people of being members of this criminal organization, they stop them and refer them for prosecution based on the fact that they are entering the country illegally. So they are trying to identify these people to the extent that they can in order to punish them as not real asylum seekers, because it appears a lot of these people are sneaking into the United States under the cover of asylum seekers. Now, they say in Venezuela that this coincides with a homicide reduction in Venezuela that is quite significant. And let us be clear, the numbers do not lie in that regard. However, the interpretation that people bring to those numbers might be a little bit skewed. So as you can see right here, this is a homicide chart per 100,000 from the nation of Venezuela. And according to their numbers, in 2022, their homicide rate was extraordinarily high at 40.4 per 100,000, and it reduced to 26.8 per 100,000. And obviously, this is a very significant drop in homicides in the nation of Venezuela, and this is what some people say you would expect to see if they released the people from their prisons and sent them to the United States of America. And by the way, I've actually looked at the data for Colombia, a neighboring country, and their homicide rate is particularly stable, which is interesting because you would expect some of these criminal people that are posing as migrants to the United States of America, that are expanding their influence, to be affecting Colombia if, again, they're being released from the prisons in Venezuela. But if you actually look a little bit further in the homicide data, what you can find out is that homicide had actually been dropping in Venezuela quite consistently from their peak in 2017. In fact, there is a greater drop in homicide from 2018 to 2019 and a greater drop from 2019 to 2020 than from 2022 to 2023. Now, I bring this up for two reasons. First and foremost, so that you could see for yourself that Venezuela is still a pretty violent place in Latin America. It's not like their homicide rate dropped in the same way as El Salvador. And by the way, I've actually had people in my comments accusing the El Salvadorian president of doing the same, sending the gang members to the United States of America, even though that's clearly and obviously not the case. El Salvador's significant drop in crime and homicide in particular has to do with the fact that they locked up significantly more people, and in Venezuela, people are accusing them of letting more and more people go. But it is important to note that in terms of context, they've had more significant drops in homicide in Venezuela than what we've seen from 2022 to 2023. And more interestingly to me is the question on whether or not we would actually see a homicide reduction if this gang were released from prison and sent to the United States of America. Because contrary to what you might be thinking, I don't actually agree that this would be the case. Because one of the things that made El Salvador so violent at its peak is the fact that gang members in the United States were returned to El Salvador via deportation, and they were able to spread a much more sophisticated criminal organization over in their home country based on the fact that they were not holding these people in prison and based on the fact that these gang members were international. So if Venezuela released all of these people to the United States of America, the idea that their crime rate in Venezuela would necessarily drop is actually not really the case, and we've seen evidence in other Latin American countries to the opposite. And more importantly, the president of Venezuela, Nicholas Maduro, knows that we've seen the opposite occur in terms of criminality with Latin American countries when those gang members exist both in the United States and in the home Latin American country and are sprinkled throughout other nations in between. So it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense for Venezuela's president, Nicholas Maduro, to do this, especially with this particular gang.
The Tren de Aragua criminal gang used this prison as their base to carry out drug trafficking, extortion, and kidnappings. The mafia group is believed to have more than 4,000 members across at least 8 Latin American countries. Venezuela's Attorney General says a security raid to retake control of the prison dealt a devastating blow to the group. On Saturday, the government proudly paraded media through the prison, showing how the group had used the facility as their headquarters, building a disco, a swimming pool, and even a zoo, all inside the detention facility.
Also, we have evidence to believe that Venezuela, rather than cooperating with this particular criminal organization, has actually declared war on this particular organization. And one of the instances of this that was actually broadcast took place in September of 2023, where the Venezuelan government sent 1,100 troops to get control over a prison. And when I say prison, I want you guys to understand this was more of a hotel for the criminals, according to all of the different reporting, in that it had a zoo, a children's playground, and a nightclub, because this was one of the epicenters of that particular criminal organization, where they carried out a lot of different criminality, not only in Venezuela, but in other parts of Latin America. And we have some footage of that I want you to see.
We have total control of this prison, and we have completely dismantled the self-proclaimed former Tren de Aragua.
The government has released footage of Wednesday's operation, in which some 11,000 heavily armed troops from the National Guard stormed the prison. They recovered rocket launchers, grenades, high-caliber ammunition, and even Bitcoin mining equipment. The government says they have captured 60 members of the gang, but its top leadership, including their boss, known as El Niño Guerrero, managed to flee through tunnels.
Now look, the reason I bring up this particular context for you guys out there in the audience is so that you can understand that just because you hear a theory and you see some supporting evidence doesn't necessarily mean that that theory makes sense. The fact of the matter is the Venezuelan homicide rate did drop in 2023 to one of its lowest levels in history. However, there is more significant drops in recent history that don't necessarily coincide with our current migrant crisis. On top of that, the idea that the Venezuelan government is both working with this criminal organization while simultaneously raiding this criminal organization's epicenter, raiding its headquarters, and disrupting them with 11,000 troops is a bit far-fetched in my opinion. What I think is actually occurring in the nation of Venezuela is a bit of a crackdown on this organization, and on top of that, you have people that are members of this criminal organization taking advantage of the migrant crisis. However, they're not doing so under the direct direction of the Venezuelan government. And let us be clear, I do not like socialist institutions. I do not like socialist governments. I don't like Maduro. I'm not praising and or defending him. It just does not seem like the incentives line up as cleanly as people say they do. And while there is definitely 100% evidence for these gang members arriving in the United States of America and spreading throughout the course of Latin America, the fact of the matter is there isn't that much evidence that it's under the direction of the Venezuelan government. It seems like their crime rate is dropping due to a number of factors. First and foremost, it was already dropping prior to the United States asylum seeker migrant crisis. Secondly, and more importantly, it is dropping because a lot of males are leaving the nation of Venezuela and a lot of criminals are leaving the nation of Venezuela, which is actually more likely due to crackdowns rather than to a soft on crime kind of agreement with the nation of Venezuela. On top of that, if Venezuela was systematically removing the criminals and essentially sending them to the United States of America, we would likely see their crime rate go up in the long term, which is why they would be disincentivized from doing that. But if we set that long-term issue aside for the time being, we would likely see the crime rates in Venezuela reduce more than they actually have, because it's still a very violent place in Latin America with that homicide rate of around 25 per 100,000. It's still more dangerous than many American cities that you think are quite dangerous. Like, sure, there's undeniably been a crime reduction, but the city of Chicago has a lower homicide rate in 2023 than did Venezuela. So what I think is actually happening, what I think is actually going on, at least until further evidence is presented of this particular theory, is as follows. There is a weakness in the United States southern border. There were a lot of Venezuelans, disproportionately men, fleeing that country, and a lot of the criminal types are likely fleeing due to the crackdown on them that is occurring there. Now, by the way, the reason I attribute this to the crackdown rather than attributing it to this plan or scheme supposedly that Maduro has is is because working with the gangs was the strategy in 2017 when they declared a peace zone as long as the gangs were in control of the particular area, and it turned out that was the same year that they had their highest rate of homicide. This pivot in strategy, these raids that actually started in the 2020s, 2021 and whatnot, they seem to be what has been driving down the homicide rate. And by the way, if you ever want to talk crap about American police, just look at the numbers related to some of these raids by the Venezuelan National Guard, because it's kind of crazy. Because they're killing almost as many criminals in these raids as they're capturing. In fact, in this July 13th raid, where they were trying to get this guy called El Coqui, who's the leader of a gang that was the #1 gang in Caracas, the capital, they killed 22 criminals and captured 38. Now, in other raids, you get casualties like 23 people killed, and again, it is in comparison to an almost equal amount of people captured. So these raids are serious, which is one of the reasons why I do believe that criminals are fleeing the law enforcement rather than this working together in terms of strategy. Because again, when they tried working together, they ended up with the highest homicide rate in the last 20 years in Venezuela. However, when they broke apart, when they started going at them, that's when we saw crime start to go down. On top of that, while it's undoubted that there are members of this criminal organization that are coming to the United States of America, the fact of the matter is, if mass members of these people from prison were being released to the United States of America, we likely would see more information about this rather than a request for more information back in 22 and not much coverage related to it after the fact. On top of that, if we removed more of these criminals, or they were being paid to come to the United States and leave Venezuela, we would likely see more of these people not committing crimes in Venezuela, and their crime rate would drop even more significantly if this theory is to be believed. Remember, when the nation of El Salvador got rid of these criminals by locking them all up in prison, their homicide rate dropped to one of the lowest in the entire world. There are extremely safe United States cities that are significantly less violent than the nation of El Salvador, and you would think if there was a mass exodus of the criminal types, even from the prisons that are still in control, you would see something similar in the nation of Venezuela, but we just have not seen that. We've seen a significant reduction, but not even the most significant reduction in recent years, and these people emerging in the United States of America. However, the idea that there's a coordinated plan with Chinese backing is a bit far-fetched as of right now with the evidence that is being presented right now. Now, to be clear, Venezuela is fully aware that a bunch of their criminal types have made it to the United States of America. In fact, they're refusing to accept people that we want to deport back to their home country, and that's definitely a problem, and that's definitely intentional. I just don't buy into the fact that the Venezuelan government would need to even pay to send these people to the United States of America when they're making that journey on their own. They're smuggling people from their country to the US on their own, and they're infiltrating amongst those populations entering to this nation on their own. So yeah, while it is an interesting theory, to be clear, as of right now, there's a simpler explanation that I believe there's more evidence for, and I think people should wait on that more evidence rather than getting caught up in the details of whether or not the Venezuelan government is sending them, because I think this will just be used as a way to dismiss you guys out there in the audience when you complain about this as promoting conspiracy theories, when the fact of the matter is, regardless of the Venezuelan government's involvement or not, these criminal gangs are getting here. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Venezuelan criminal gangs coming to the United States. Till next time.